I remember quite a few years ago now, I talked to a committed Christian father who was having problems with his 16-year-old third-born daughter. She was attending a large Christian school and had developed a dangerous soul tie with another girl in the school. The daughter had a bad attitude but was still somewhat obedient. One night the father told me he came home and, quote, "Our daughter asked to talk to me outside. She told me she had been arrested with her friend for shoplifting. She was crying and seemed truly sorry for what she had done. I told her I was glad she had gotten caught. I asked if it was the first time she had done this, and she said it was. I asked her if it was the first time her friend had done it. She didn't want to answer me, but finally admitted that it wasn't the first time for her friend. The school expelled both girls for a semester. We homeschooled our daughter, and she was diligent in doing her studies. The big mistake we made during this period was allowing her to stay in contact with her friend. She was constantly on the phone with her. When the new semester started, both girls were readmitted to school. Our daughter spent the night before school started at her friend's house. After the first day, we found out both girls had been called to the principal's office for wearing their skirts too short. Our daughter had been belligerent to the assistant principal about it. I didn't trust myself to talk to her. One evening, I needed the phone line. This was the days when cell phones were just coming out. My daughter had been on the line to her friend. When she finally got off, she said to me, "You need to get your own line." That broke the camel's back and released a torrent of anger that scared my daughter, and I could see the hatred for me in her eyes. She left home the next day and spent the next 3 days with her friend. I called her up the third day and apologized. She came back home, but our home was filled with tension. Next, I started recording her phone conversations. I found out horrible things she had been doing and that there was a boy involved who was in rebellion against his father and smoking marijuana. We decided to confront my daughter with her sin and institute measures to get her heart back. I first confessed my sin. I couldn't keep from crying as I asked for her forgiveness. When I asked if there was anything she would like to confess, she said no. Then I set the tape recorder on the table and started it playing, and she began screaming, "I hate you. I hate you. I'm glad I did those things. I did those things so I would not be like you." The father cleansed his daughter's room, then separated her completely from her friends. Her friend found out and reported them to the state Child and Family Services. This was in Florida. An HRS representative showed up at their house. A letter intercepted from the friend, and this is an actual copy of the letter, said, "I called HRS. If you talk to them, tell them you're scared for your life. If you really want out, hurt yourself and say your dad beats you. If I can get you a cell phone, we're going to buy a teddy bear and put it inside." With his pastor's permission, I talked to the father and suggested that he get away from home and spend time one-on-one with his daughter in a remote area. He took several of our videos and watched one per day in a certain order, and then was discussing each one with his daughter. For 2 weeks, they roughed it in the mountains of northern Georgia. I talked to him once or twice, but he was seeing no headway. A few days later, we were in Knoxville, Tennessee, and met the father, mother, and daughter. My wife talked to the girl. She was the worst kind of a rebel, polite and nice on the outside and rejecting everything on the inside. My wife said to me, "Honey, I don't know. This girl is pretty hard. I don't think she's going to change." In Luke chapter 9, we read, "And it came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, that Jesus steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face, and they went and entered into a village of the Samaritans to make ready for him. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? But Jesus turned and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit you're of, for the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. I might interject right here. I have a DVD on the table entitled Reasons Why I Use the King James Version Bible. And one of the reasons is this verse right here. These words of Jesus, ye know not what manner of spirit you are, for the Son of Man is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. Those words disappear from almost every other Bible version. But Jesus said that his words would never pass away. Heaven and earth would pass away, but his words would not pass away. But if I had not had a King James Version Bible, this message that has helped thousands of people would not even exist. Anyway, the Son of Man has not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went to another village. Notice that Jesus didn't say, fellas, you don't realize what you're saying. Jesus said, ye know not what manner of spirit you're of. And the meaning was, you don't realize the spirit coming from you, the spirit that your spirit is emitting or revealing. Notice with me, first of all, that the Bible mentions both personal and impersonal spirits. The Greek word pneuma, translated spirit, may be used in relation to the personal Holy Spirit in one verse, a personal evil spirit in another verse, and an impersonal spirit of meekness or truth or error or holiness or life, and so on in some other verses. That phrase, spirit of, actually occurs 139 times in the Bible. To properly understand this, we need to recognize that there is a division between your spirit and good and bad spirits, whether personal or impersonal, that affect your spirit. And thirdly, the spirit that others sense coming from your spirit, which is not necessarily either a demonic or an angelic spirit. It is simply what others sense coming from your spirit. A mother noticed that her obnoxious little boy had become kind and considerate after spending time around a certain teacher. She said, "What does Mrs. Smith do to teach you to be polite, Johnny?" And he replied, "She doesn't do anything, Mom. She just walks around and we feel polite." The children were sensing and responding to their teacher's gracious spirit. Secondly, we must try the spirits coming from ours and other people's spirits to make sure they are of God. 1 John 4:1 gives the principle, "Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God." And the context means that we should try the spirits to see if they are of God or of Satan. But the principle would carry over further. And it would mean that you and I must try, test, examine, and scrutinize the spirit coming from our own spirit, as well as the spirit coming from other people's spirits. James and John were good men, righteous men, men with good motives, men who wanted to please Jesus. But Jesus said, "Ye know not what manner of spirit you're of." You don't realize the spirit that your spirit is putting off. Thirdly, there is a great possibility that we may not realize it when our spirit is putting off the wrong spirit. James and John didn't. And their spirit of anger was so intense and severe, they wanted to destroy an entire village full of people. I think about Proverbs chapter 16, verse 2 here that says, "All the ways of man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weigheth the spirits." Jesus dealt with the possibility of our being blinded to major faults in our own lives, especially in our relationships with others. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, "And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? How could anyone have a huge log in his eye and not know it?" James and John did, and you and I may as well. How easy it is to see the mote of our wife's lack of respect and yet not to see the beam of our own spirit of anger. How easy to see the mote of our children's disobedience or stubbornness, and yet not see the beam of our own wrath. One way you might tell whether or not you have a problem in this area is to ask yourself if your father or grandfather had the problem. Anger is one of those sins that is often like a family curse that passes down the generations from grandfather to father to son to grandson and so on. The father in my opening illustration told me, I got interested in my family history. I know my father always had a real problem with anger. There are still aunts and uncles who knew my grandfather. With little or any prompting, I heard stories about his anger. And to top it all off, I found newspaper articles from the 1880s that told of the fights my great-grandfather got into because of his temper. My wife and I were at a church in the state of Georgia. A father with a rebellious 17-year-old daughter and a rebellious 15-year-old son asked to take us to the airport so that he could talk to us along the way. As we rode along, the man described the problems with his children and how he had tried to deal with them and that nothing seemed to be working. And I said to him, do you have a problem with anger? Yes, he said. And I traced it back to some guilt from some earlier unresolved conflicts. Then I went back and dealt with those things. That is a real possibility. I deal with that on the message, Anger the Destroyer. I said, that's wonderful. So do you still have a problem with anger? Occasionally, but not very often. I said, well, what do you do when you get angry? He said, well, I've made myself accountable to my wife and my children. Anytime I get angry, I give the children $20 and I give my wife $50. I've had people who said, man, I wish my dad or my husband would get angry and do that for me. So I said, how much have you paid out in the last few months? He said, well, I'd say I've paid out $150 to $200 to each of the children and probably $500 to $600 to my wife. In a little while, I'll tell you the rest of that conversation. Now, what is the difference between anger and an angry spirit? An angry spirit manifests itself in a harshness that keeps those around us on edge. An angry spirit cuts back on a person's life potential. A person may have all kinds of talents, ability, and potential. He may be loving, kind, and gentle, but the angry spirit causes people to be afraid to be around him. I would clarify here. I'm not talking about the fearful respect that accompanies almost any strong leader. I am talking about a wrong sense of fear that is created by the unpredictability of a man or a woman's angry spirit. The spirit of anger is the very opposite of the spirit of Christ, which is a spirit of meekness and gentleness. And a spirit of anger is sometimes evident in a person's tone of voice, even when he is carrying on a normal conversation. I was in Denver, Colorado, speaking at a homeschool convention, 3 years ago, I think, and I gave a different message on anger. And after I spoke, a man came up and he was going to talk to me. I was still on the platform, and there was sort of a barrier on that platform, and so I was leaning over, and he came up, and he was trying to talk to me, and he starts telling me that his wife and children tell them he's got a problem with anger, and he said, I just tell them they don't understand. I'm an intense person. And he said, I told him I did not have a spirit of anger. And he just kept going like that. I listened to him for a minute, and I listened. I said, sir, could I please help you? And he said, yes, sure you can. I said, sir, I don't have very long here, and I'd like to take longer to do this, but can I just tell you what I see? He said, of course you can. I said, sir, you have a very intense spirit of anger, one of the worst of anybody I've ever been around. I said, I've only been talking to you for a couple of minutes here, and you've got a terrible spirit of anger. He said, I do? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, what do you suggest? And I said, you really need to get my whole anger series and watch it. Watch it together as a family. And to his credit, he went straight back and got the whole anger series. A wonderful couple came to talk to me, a husband and wife, about what they could do to reach their rebellious son. And I said to them, do you have a problem with anger? And, well, yes, but we feel like we've been dealing with it. And finally I said to them, I need to help you. You both, they were sitting in my office. I was their pastor. I said, you both have a spirit of anger that comes out in your attitude, your tone of voice, and your demeanor. We talked for another 30 minutes, but they couldn't see it. So while they talked, I would interrupt them. I stopped each of them 2 or 3 times, and I said, there it is. And I repeated the statement they just said and the way they said it. I said, listen to yourself. There is a harshness in your voice or in your attitude. It was wonderful. This couple was humble and teachable, and they kept, every time I did it, they said, thank you. In fact, if they hadn't done that, I would have backed off. Thank you. We want to see it. Keep pointing it out to us. And finally, I said to them, you're going to have to make yourself accountable to other family members. This will not be easy. You will need to say to other family members, correct me, not just for outbursts of anger, but for any time you even sense a spirit of anger or hear a tone of anger in my voice. Now, remember that we're dealing with the spirit of things. Incidentally, consider this as one possible definition, not the only one, but as one possible definition of the fullness of the Holy Spirit. Read it off the screen, would you please, everybody? The fullness of the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit so controlling your spirit that no spirit that is a wrong spirit is able to do so. Number 4, victory in the area of the Spirit, other sins coming from you, is more important than victory in the area of actions others see you doing. Another way to put this might be this: it's good to obey the letter of the law. It's better to obey the spirit of the law. Galatians 5:18. But if you be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. How easy it is to be deceived in this area and feel like you're fine because you obey the letter of the law, but disobey the spirit of the law. Jesus dealt with the Pharisees in this area when he said unto them, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought you to have done. And Jesus saying it was good that you paid your tithe, but not to leave the other undone. Now, if you get the spirit area right, then the actions will eventually take care of themselves. But just getting certain actions right gives no guarantee at all that other actions will be all right. Note that the spirit of obedience is more important than the letter of obedience. Have you ever heard the story about the little boy whom his mama said to him, Johnny, you sit down. He looked back at his mama and said, I don't want to sit down. He said, Johnny, I said sit down. He said, I don't want to sit down. She said, Johnny, if you don't sit down right now, I'm going to spank you. So he sat down, looked at his mom, and said, I'm still standing up on the inside. Do you see the difference? How important the spirit of obedience. He was obeying the letter of obedience. But if you get the spirit area right, the letter is more likely to be right. The truth is this: where there is victory in the spirit, there's far more likely to be victory in the outward manifestations. And this is part, I believe, of what the Bible means when it tells us to be slow to wrath. Step away, not just from anger, but from getting angry. Deal with the attitude toward anger, and the action won't be nearly as likely to be a problem. Sometimes I've talked to parents who wonder why there is so much contention and division in their homes. Every parent I know would like their children to obey and have sweet spirits and attitudes. But Dad and Mom, if you are full of anger, that anger will stir up strife in your whole family. An angry man stirreth up strife. That same principle is even true in a church. One pastor who heard this message said to me, Brother Davis, I have gone from church to church all my life and always blamed the people. And when I heard that message on spirit of anger, I realized for the first time in my life that it was really my fault. My spirit of anger was creating so much contention and strife in the churches where I was, and I really wish I'd heard this 20 years sooner. Number 5, there is no biblical justification for either anger or a spirit of anger. Now, allow me to give you an observation here about the typical Christian's attitude toward anger. The typical Christian in America, their approach is this. Well, anger might be bad at sometimes, especially if it causes you to hurt or kill somebody, but there is a place for anger. Anger may be a useful tool for you to use in the right setting or situation. Sometimes anger is the only thing that will work to bring somebody into line. Releasing anger releases tension. If you don't release it, it can be bad for you. And of course, there's always been a need, hasn't there, for righteous indignation. Now, would you agree that's the typical Christian's attitude in America about anger? Of course, my opinion or your opinion doesn't really matter. All that matters is, what does the Bible say? Psalm 37 verse 8, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Notice what that verse does not say. It does not say keep your spiritual anger and forsake your carnal anger. It says get rid of anger. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 19. This is my text verse for the message on the high cost of anger. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. Proverbs 27, verse 4. Wrath is cruel, and anger is outrageous. And outrageous means like a downpour or a flood. Did you know it is not possible for you to have a little bit of anger? Anger is a flood. Ecclesiastes 7:9 says, anger rests in the bosom of fools. My wife and I were riding along in the car with this man who had paid $1,000 to his wife and children for his anger. And I looked at him and I said to him, sir, part of your problem is you're not taking your anger seriously enough. He said, really? And I took a New Testament. He had a New Testament on his dash. I pulled it down. I turned to Galatians chapter 5. And I read him this passage. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, etc. Then I said, sir, there are some things in life you get victory over because you know you just can't do them. The consequences are too great. There are some things you don't do at your house. You don't bring X-rated movies into your house and watch them as a family. You don't do it. You don't bring an idol into your living room and bow down before it. You don't have a witch come into your house and hold a seance. And you don't get angry in your house. Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger be put away from you. A father called me. He had a rebellious 15-year-old daughter and 6 more children. The daughter had run away once for a few hours, but then returned home. And the father admitted to me that he had a problem with anger, but I could tell he didn't realize how serious his problem really was. He began to gloss over the problem by telling me the high standards that he had in his home. He felt his daughter was reacting to his standards. He said, I don't have a TV. We don't have rock music. We don't allow immodest clothing. He's going right down the line. Finally, I said, sir, how often do you get angry? Well, maybe twice a month. There was such a spirit, it seemed, such a spirit of pride and harshness in his voice, in the way he dealt with standards with his family. I said to him, sir, I'm so glad you don't have a TV. But you need to understand something. You would probably be better off to let a TV run 24 hours a day in your home than to get angry twice a month. You have no idea the amount of destruction your anger is bringing to your family. Another man told me he had a problem with anger, but he didn't think it was too bad. He said, I only get mad once every couple of months. My answer to that is, how would you like to live next door to a volcano that only explodes once every couple of months? Incidentally, he didn't know it, but his family was sensing his spirit of anger all the other days of those months. Colossians 3:8 says, now he also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. I was in Arkansas. I had given a different message on anger. And I had gone to my table after the service. A man came walking up to me. And he looked at me, he pointed his finger in my face like that, and he said, you know the difference in you and me? Is you raise girls, and I raise boys. And I want to tell you, you have to use a little bit of anger when you have boys. That's what you have to do. And you had girls. Well, he didn't understand it, but this whole ministry was born because I had a rebellious daughter, and I used anger, and I thought it was one of those tools that you use. That's what everybody had always told me, and I didn't understand any better. And I stood there and talked to him for a while, but this verse is the one I wish I could have given him if I'd have thought of it that night. Notice that anger and wrath and blasphemy and filthy communication. And he had said to me, you got to have a little bit of anger. Let me ask you a question here. Is it right to have a little bit of blasphemy? Talk to me.
No, sir.
Is it right to have a little bit of filthy communication?
No.
Is it right to have a little bit of anger? No. We always have to pause right there and think on that one for a little while. But you simply cannot justify the use of anger. And I gave that illustration back in January in a church in another state. And the pastor stood up when I got done. And I knew he was from that church. I didn't know he would know who it was. But I knew he was originally from that church. And he said, I know the man that Brother Davis was telling the story about. And he said he was always defending his anger. But he said, I've talked to his sons. He said his sons were friends of mine. And he said his sons told me, we really wish our dad would deal with his anger. You see, he thought he had a little bit of anger. The truth is, he had a spirit of anger all the time. And then he would have these outbursts of anger that created rebellion and resentment in each of his sons. 1 Timothy 2:8 says, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. Holy hands are hands without wrath. Titus 1:7 gives one of the qualifications for a bishop, not soon angry. It means not prone to get angry. James 1:20 says, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. The wrath of man is always wrong, always carnal, never spiritual, never righteous. Now, you know, what I've heard all my life is, well, you know, there is a need for righteous indignation. Isn't there such a thing as righteous indignation? Well, that phrase, those two words, are never used together in your Bible. The only adjectives used to describe indignation are great and fiery, and they occur 4 times. Twice it is God's great or fiery indignation. Twice it is man's great indignation. The indignation of God was righteous. The indignation of man was sin. Some think, but couldn't God give his wrath to someone? Well, if he did, he would violate his own command in Ephesians 4 to let all wrath and anger be put away from you. There are illustrations in the Bible where it looks like someone is assuming or receiving God's wrath. But when you see the results, you realize that man cannot handle wrath at all, especially God's wrath. If God gave you righteous indignation, you or I would turn it into unrighteous indignation immediately. In Numbers chapter 11, we're told that the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. Moses was also displeased. And it appears there that God's anger has stirred Moses to become angry. 5 verses later, Moses asked God to kill him. When Samson got angry, he stopped fighting for the Lord and started carrying out personal vengeance. The 2 questions I'm most commonly asked by people who defend anger are these. But didn't Jesus get angry? And how about the verse that says, be ye angry and sin not? Let's look at the first one. Did Jesus get angry? I read every verse in the Bible that uses the following 7 words. Anger, angry, wrath, wrath, fury, furious, and indignation. Those words occur a total of 584 times in the Bible. I was amazed to discover, as I was reading through every one of them, how many of those occurrences involved God's wrath. In fact, I was so amazed, I decided I would go back and count all the verses that involved God's wrath. And out of the 584 occurrences, 470 appeared to me to be referring to the wrath, anger, fury, or indignation of God. That is 4 out of 5 times. 80% of the Bible, of the references in the Bible to anger, are God's anger. Verses about the Lord burning with anger are actually pretty common in the Bible. In Numbers chapter 11, the children of Israel complained about having nothing but manna to eat, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. 1 Kings 14 talks about how Jeroboam provoked the Lord to anger when he led the people to worship calves of gold. Isaiah 30, behold, the name of the Lord cometh from far, burning with his anger. Verses like those appear hundreds of times in the Bible. Then I tried to find all the times that Jesus used anger, and I found it was 1 time in the entire New Testament, in Mark chapter 3. The Pharisees were watching Jesus to see if he would heal the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath day. And when Jesus had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, stretch forth thine hand. Only 1 time in all the Gospels does it say that Jesus had anger. That same Greek word used in Mark chapter 3 verse 5 is used 34 times in the New Testament, but is never used for any other human being any other time in the New Testament. But the word does occur again in Ephesians 4:31. Let all anger be put away from you. And no, I don't fully understand what I just shared with you, but the Bible is clearly telling you and me that we cannot handle anger. God's anger is spiritual and produces justice. Deuteronomy describes how God in anger overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Man's anger is carnal and produces injustice. You remember the story of Nebuchadnezzar, who built the beautiful city of Babylon and the hanging gardens of Babylon, he got angry at a few of the wise men because they couldn't remember his dream. He was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Notice that his anger is so carnal and produces injustice. In the book of Esther, Haman was so angry at Mordecai that he plotted to destroy the entire race of the Jews. He wound up hanging from his own gallows. God can, in fact, read this with me, would you please? God can righteously get angry and then righteously take actions that man cannot righteously take because man isn't God. Romans 12:19 is a really, really key verse in this area. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And there's a powerful truth there that you must not miss, and that is the purpose of wrath is vengeance. Give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine. Ezekiel chapter 24, verse 7 and 8 confirms this further when it says, her blood is upon the top of a rock, that it might cause fury to come up to take vengeance. Notice, vengeance is not given to us. It belongs to God. Amen. If a dad or a mom spank a child while they're angry, they've not corrected or disciplined their child at all. They have carried out vengeance upon the child. They have violated God's requirement in Genesis 18:19 and Luke 1:17 that a parent must be just. That act of vengeance is unjust and easily causes a child to become either disobedient or rebellious. And I don't know about you fathers, but it grieves my heart to think of the numbers of times when my girls were little that I violated God's truth in this area. According to Romans 13:4, God does delegate the responsibility of vengeance to rulers. He is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. But the wrath mentioned there is God's wrath, not man's. God doesn't delegate or give his wrath to anyone. Even earthly rulers are not given God's wrath. If a judge gets angry in the courtroom, the whole case will probably be thrown out, because anger negates justice's ability to deal impartially. Somebody asked me, but won't a man need anger if he has to defend his family? You especially would not need anger then. And I'm not saying that a man wouldn't be greatly tempted to become angry, but what you really would need is courage and discernment. Angry people act out of rage instead of reason. Angry people have unjustly lynched innocent people in their wrath. Now, did you notice that when I listed the 7 words that I did not use the word mad? The word mad is used 21 times in your Bible and is never used in reference to God. It almost always refers to a man being beside himself or crazy. And sometimes it is anger that has made him that way. Paul referred to himself as having been mad in relation to persecuting Christians before his conversion. Now, I'm not going to take time. If you listen to the DVD on the table, I spend a while right here talking about the angry spirit that is in the pulpit when preachers use an angry spirit, and how that angry spirit is all that it takes for people in the congregation to be justified in their angry spirit, and then you lose most of the children for the next generation. The other question to be answered here is, be ye angry and sin not. And you notice, first of all, the number of clear scriptures that say to get rid of anger completely. 5 verses away is that verse that says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger be put away from you. But notice in this verse that the Greek verb tense for be ye angry is a present passive imperative. Present means that it is happening right now. Passive means not that you're acting, but that you're being acted upon. An imperative is a command, and the meaning is this: there are going to be times when you feel something or someone working on you to make you angry. Recognize that. Don't let it happen. Be angered. Don't sin by getting angry. You may not be able to stop the initial emotion you feel that leads to the sin of anger, but you can, with God's help, refuse to express anger itself or allow anger to deepen and turn into wrath. Years ago, there were all these articles by secular psychologists and Christian counselors who said, you have to release anger. They would actually send someone into a room with a pillow, and they were supposed to beat the pillow, beat it until they got all their frustrations out and supposedly feel better. Same thing as knocking a hole in the wall or throwing things. It's just not as damaging. And you know, I was preaching and I said, that is not God's way to deal with anger. You know, they came out a few years later and said, we were wrong. That's not the way to deal with anger. But you know, I was, a few months ago, I was reading an airline magazine, and it talked about how in some of the big cities now, they have, what do they call that room? I forget what it's called. They have an anger room is what it is. And you can actually, you pay like $500. And they will fit this room out just like you want it to be. They will put in there exactly the pictures that you want in there. They'll put pictures in there for you. They will put tables in there for you. They will make that room just, you pay however much it is, and then they let you go in that room with a baseball bat. And you beat those pictures to smithereens. You beat the furniture in that room. You can absolutely destroy everything in that room and walk out supposedly feeling better. But you know, if you don't deal with the sin of anger and ask God for His forgiveness and get God's help, how you going? Anybody by any kind of physical exercise can release some of the tensions that are built up. God, that's one of the things that God designed for work. I love to go. Every man who is doing what he ought to do has a certain amount of stress in his life. And you know what? If you'll work some of that stress off. But that is not the main way that you deal with anger. And two things wrong with that reasoning. Anger is not something you can properly control. It usually gets out of control. It's like a skunk spraying a little bit under your house. It tends not to be a little bit. Anybody ever had a skunk? Hey, anybody ever had a skunk spray underneath your house? It's something, isn't it? Were you able to get it out?
Right next door, right outside of our, underneath our window, and it stinks.
Were you able to get rid of it? Who was it? You? Not for a long time. We've had several people do that. My daughter and son-in-law were living in a rent house, and a skunk got underneath that house and sprayed. They tried everything under the sun. They finally just moved out. They gave it up. They couldn't do it. Anyway, anger is like a flood that has the power to wash away homes and churches. Once you wrongly give permission to have a little bit of anger, it winds up being a lot more than a little bit. Trying to have a little bit of anger is like trying to have a little bit of adultery, a little bit of idolatry, a little bit of murder, or a little bit of filthy communication or blasphemy. I have never yet met anyone who said they control their anger who said they did. The second problem with the world's reasoning about controlling anger is that it causes us to miss God's way to control anger, which is to put the mind under the command of Christ and His Word, then have the mind tell the will what to do so that the emotion of anger is unplugged before it gets turned on. I really break this down more thoroughly in the message, God's way to deal with your wrong emotions. You know, I watched that guy. I told you about it this morning. I watched that guy yesterday in the airport. Gets so angry when they have problems with the flight. I'm sitting there saying, Lord, you're on the throne. If you want me there tomorrow, I will do my part. If you don't, it's okay. Lord, I've prayed that you wouldn't let me get on an airplane where there's something wrong with it, and they said there was a major thing wrong with that engine. Well, I don't want to get on that plane. I don't care. If I get here today or not, I hope to live a little longer than just yesterday. Amen. They repaired the engine. They backed it. The pilots got on the plane with nobody else on board. I've never seen this before. I watched it yesterday. They backed the plane out, and they revved the engines up. They checked it after it was repaired. They checked it all out. All the gauges registered normal, and then we boarded the plane and we flew to Chicago 3 hours later than we were supposed to. And I tried to get on a different flight. I prayed about it. I said, Lord, I went online. They told me there was no other flight for me to take. Well, I went online and found one. There was a Delta flight that was available. So I walked up to the counter, and she said, I explained to the lady, and I said, can I get on that Delta flight? It will get me to Atlanta, and I will get to Cleveland at 11:30 tomorrow night. Well, I actually got here at 9:30, so it was all right, But she said, sir, we can't put you on that flight. I said, ma'am, I just got offline, and it says there are 2 seats. She said, I understand, but we just talked to the Delta agent, and they told us we could not put anybody else on that flight. And I walked back, sat down, and said, God, I tried. If you don't want me on that flight, I don't want to be on that flight. The mind has to tell the will, settle your emotions down. What are you going to do? There's nothing you can do about it, so that's God's way to deal with it. Even after all this truth I've given you, and by the way, there's more truth on some of the other anger DVDs that I haven't given you tonight. There might be somebody still needing to defend anger. Did you know God gave verses warning us not to defend anger? Proud and haughty scorner is his name who dealeth in proud wrath. Proud wrath is wrath that says, I'm right to have this anger. And how about this one? Surely the churning of milk bringeth forth butter. The wringing of the nose bringeth forth blood. So the forcing of wrath bringeth forth strife. Now, maybe you're wondering, like I was when I originally formulated this message about 20 years ago. Is there anybody in the Bible who had spiritual anger that was helpful instead of hurtful and right instead of wrong? I have a list of every man in the Bible that those 7 words were used in relation to. Incidentally, here's an interesting tidbit, all right? Check it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. They were all men. 52 of them plus 2 unnumbered groups of men. Not one lady in the Bible is specifically named as being angry. You say, don't you think Jezebel was angry? Yes, I think she was, but it doesn't say she was angry. You get what I'm saying here? All right, I think Athaliah was very angry, but it doesn't actually say she was angry. The main verse about an angry woman seems to be Proverbs 21:19. It's better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and an angry woman. And fellas, that is not a good place for you to say amen, okay? So anyway, I want you to be able to have peace when you get home tonight. So we're heading that one off right now, okay? But you know what's happened in our day? I've had people, I was in Oregon. I spoke at the homeschool convention in Oregon. And I gave the message on the high cost of anger. And I was back at my table, and we had a lot of people around my table. And there was a lady who was just in my session. She was 30 feet away when everybody heard her, and everybody at my table turned and looked at her. She was screaming 30 feet away. She said, I know I got a problem with anger, and I've tried everything to deal with it. Are you sure those DVDs will help me get victory over my anger? And by then, she's at the table, you know. Everybody's looking at her, and I talked to her for a little while, and she said, I've tried everything to deal with it. I can't seem to get victory. And what's happened is we've had such terrible, we've justified it with our men. And it's like anger, or a spirit of anger, is something that other people can catch from you. It's like a bad disease. It's worse than the measles, folks. And you can be around an angry person. You can pick that up, and if you're not careful, there's an intensity about it that is appealing to the flesh. That wants, and this is what's happened. I believe that ladies have been around angry men so much that they have picked up on this anger. Back to the men. Peter got angry and chopped off a man's ear, and he did that defending Jesus. Remember it? And Jesus told him to put up his sword, and the message there, Jesus doesn't want us using anger to defend him to start with. Anger is a carnal weapon. It is a powerful carnal weapon, but it cannot accomplish spiritual purposes. You cannot use carnal weapons to accomplish spiritual purposes. In Exodus 32, Moses' anger waxed hot. He cast the tables out of his hands and broke them beneath the mount. Wait a minute. God wrote those tables with his own hand. Was there really anything spiritual about breaking them? This is a powerful picture of how anger breaks God's law. And it's a picture of how anger destroys the very truth you were supposed to be presenting when you got angry. And it's also interesting what happened after that. God required Moses to cut out replacement tables of stone and walk up Mount Sinai carrying those tables of stone. Do you know what those tables of stone may have weighed? 2 tablets of stone that may have been this big. They could have easily weighed 50 to 100 pounds. He had to climb Mount Sinai carrying those tables of stone back. Think about what you have to do to rebuild whatever you have destroyed in anger. Now, several steps quickly here to conquer the spirit of anger. Number 1, recognize the problem and it's serious. It is time that we recognize anger for the devastating curse that it is. Denial destroys hope for help. I've dealt with people who honestly don't want to admit they have a problem in this area. In fact, the biggest problem I've seen in all these years now that I've been preaching my messages on anger, the biggest problem I've seen is this: getting people to admit they have the problem. I talked to a dad and mom with a rebellious 16-year-old daughter. After a few minutes on the telephone, I said, "Sir, could I ask you, do you have a problem with anger?" He quickly replied, "No, I don't." His wife is on the phone. She meekly said, "Well, maybe just a little problem." And he snapped back at her, "No, I don't." It is a little humorous, isn't it? I said, "Sir, may I be very honest with you?" "Of course." "Sir, you have one of the biggest problems with anger of any man I've ever spoken to in my life." "How can you say that when you've only been talking to me for 10 minutes? "Sir, you don't even know me. You have rebuked your wife 3 times in my presence in less than 10 minutes. Sir, you have a huge problem with anger. That father had already sent his daughter to Hepzibah house for over a year. She came home changed and in 3 months had become a rebel again. And he was calling me to ask if he should send her back there a second time. And I said, sir, the problem is not your daughter's, the problem is yours. Do not create a sense of rejection in your daughter by sending her away again. It would not be just to send her away when this is your problem. In my message, The Demonic-like Nature of Anger, I say this. Read it with me, everybody, would you please? If you have a... If you don't correct the anger problem, then you can't correct the marriage problem. Keep reading. If you have a parenting problem and an anger problem, if you don't correct the anger problem, then you can't correct the parenting problem. Number 2, desire the victory enough to cry out to God. The truth is there are many who have the problem, know they have the problem, but don't really want victory. Why? Because people enjoy the fear their anger creates in others. And they enjoy the carnal power that their anger gives them to control other people. Number 3, repent of the sin. Say to God, I want to turn from this sin. Number 4, confess the sins of forefathers and ask God to break any curses coming down the generations. I deal with that in detail in the message, Breaking Family Curses. Number 5, ask God to take back the ground that Satan has taken because of anger. Because according to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27, when you get angry, then Satan can take place or ground in your life. Number 6, notice the connection between anger and lust. Here's what we've seen a lot. When lust prevails, so does anger. Lust creates an insensitivity in your spirit that can cause a person to be more likely to respond wrongly to God and to others. Lust and anger are like twin sins. Wherever you see one, the other may well be around somewhere. Number 7, watch out for people and things that are going to come your way to make you angry. That's what Ephesians 4:26 says, that you're definitely going to have things coming your way that could create anger in you. Be aware of this. Don't sin. Don't give ground to Satan. Use the impulse to get angry as a signal to yield to God and to answer softly. A soft answer turneth away wrath. Few things have as much power to make you angry as anger in somebody else. I love this thought. Purpose to enter the presence of family members and business associates with praise. Psalm 100 verse 4 gives the principle, enter into God's presence with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. You should come into the presence of those you admire and love and respect with praise. The first words to each family member each day should be words of praise. And then that sets the stage for the rest of the relationships throughout that day. Praise is a motivator. It is a magnet that draws hearts to you. It is a defense for you against wrong words and attitudes. Number 9, ask God daily to fill you with the Holy Spirit and to produce the fruit of the Holy Spirit in your life. Every morning I pray, God, would you produce your fruit, the fruit of the Holy Spirit in my life? And then I say it out loud. Love, joy, peace. And I try to picture God producing these things in my life. The fruit of the Holy Spirit is the opposite of the works of the flesh. There's something powerful about just praying about it and meditating on it. And number 10, this is huge. Make yourself fully accountable. That's the reason I tell people if they have an anger problem to get the anger DVDs to watch Put it on your calendar. If you don't get it on your calendar, it won't happen. Watch one a week. Maybe it's every Friday night. Maybe it's every Saturday night. You put it on the calendar. The whole family sits down and watches one a week. It'll take you 10 weeks to go through it. Then you start over again and watch 10 more weeks. And what will happen is there will be, as the whole family's watching this, everybody is being reminded, we've got to deal with this issue. And you make yourself accountable to other family members as you do so, and eventually the water of the Word of God will wash the anger out of your life. Most people do not get victory over an addictive thing with one prayer.
Right.
You ever talk to an alcoholic? Seldom has an alcoholic gotten victory with one prayer. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying that usually when there's an addictive behavior, and anger is an addictive behavior, then it is a process of continually applying the principles of the Word of God in order to get victory in that area. Then once you get victory after 20 weeks, then you watch one DVD a month after that to keep the anger out. I had somebody come up to me a while back and said, Brother Davis, I got the victory, but I didn't keep watching one a month, and I've had to go back and get those out again, and we have to watch one a month to keep the anger out of my life and our family. Key verse is Proverbs 19:19, but I think I'll skip that right now. Let me go to this. One father who knew he had a problem in this area listened to this message several times. After a period of time, the dad asked his son how he was doing, and the son answered honestly, Dad, I can still see the fire in your eyes. And the dad said to his son, please tell me when you see it, son. It's a blind spot for me, but I want to know. I want to deal with it. And you know what? If you really want to deal with something, then you eventually will deal with something. Another father, let me get a drink of water, say amen right here. Amen. Another father who heard this message said to me, all my life I had a problem with anger, and I finally dealt with it when I heard that message. 3 weeks later, my wife pointed out to me that my little boy no longer had a problem with stuttering. The anger was creating pressure that caused his boy to be a stutterer. And when he dealt with the anger, the stuttering problem just went away. And I wonder what God will do in your home once you deal with the spirit of anger. You remember my opening story. I was talking to that father in Knoxville, Tennessee. We had discussed the problem of anger. He had listened 3 times to a different message of mine on anger. He had already made himself accountable to his wife and daughter so that anytime they just looked at him and said to him that he was angry, he would immediately apologize. And I said to him, brother, there is still a spirit of anger in your life. I can hear it in your voice even while we are talking right now. That was the moment when this message, the seed for this message, was born, standing there talking to that man. He said, Brother Davis, I don't know what you're talking about. I said, you must not just repent of the outward manifestations of anger. You must repent of the spirit of anger. You must make yourself accountable so that anytime your wife or daughter even hears the spirit of anger in your voice, they'll tell you about it. He said, I'll do it. I'll do it. I went over and talked to his rebellious daughter for a little bit. I said to her, your dad has a terrible problem with a spirit of anger, and you know it, don't you? She said, oh, yes. I said, I want you to know that I told your dad what it is, and he's going to make himself accountable not just for outbursts of anger, but for any spirit of anger as well. I want to challenge you, young lady, to give your dad a chance. This has been a terrible blind spot for him. He honestly needs your help, and I hope you won't make it difficult for him. And the reason I told her that is because rebellious teenagers will actually take advantage of a father trying to change in this area and try to provoke him to anger just so they can feel justified to continue in their rebellion. The rest of the father's story in his words. Exactly 14 days later, our daughter turned around and has been growing spiritually ever since. It's like we got our daughter back from the dead. It's been such a joy to hear her say, "Dad, I love you." She wrote her friend's father and asked his forgiveness for not telling him what was going on in his daughter's life. She pleaded with him to deal with his daughter like her dad dealt with her. My daughter's friend got pregnant, and the dad, a Sunday school teacher, said she should get an abortion, which she did. The girl's mother met my wife in the grocery store one day and blamed the Christian school for the problem. She said they should have never kicked them out. News of our daughter's turnaround got around. I've been surprised at the number of parents who are having similar problems with their daughters. I've been asked to talk to a number of them. I have yet to find a father willing to pay the price that it takes to win his daughter back. In every case, I can sense a spirit of anger and resentment. He said, my daughter is now very strong in her commitment to the Lord and is working now with other young people, helping them who have problems. For our family, the spirit of anger was the key. And in 2011, right before I stepped down as pastor, Brother Tom Gillespie and his wife, this is the man and his wife. It's 8 years ago, but it was 8 or 9 years after the story I just read happened. They came by our church in Lincoln, Illinois. I said, "Brother, I want to get a picture with you. Could I go ahead and use your picture?" He said, "Please use my picture, Brother Davis." He said, "I have not only my children, but they're grown now." He said, "I have grandchildren now." And he said, "I have a wonderful relationship with all of my children and my grandchildren because I dealt with the spirit of anger." Jesus looked at James and John, who wanted to call down fire from heaven, and said to them, "Ye know not what manner of spirit you're of." Is it possible that someone here tonight is putting off a spirit of anger that you don't even know about? You don't bring X-rated movies into your house and watch them as a family. You don't bring an idol into your living room and bow down before it. You don't have a witch come into your house and hold a seance. And you don't get angry in your house.